What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And today I'm going to talk about how cops got to be called pigs, right? And you're probably going to learn some stuff in this. I'd say 99% of you are going to learn something. Um, Probably a lot of stuff that you've heard that might not necessarily be true. And so if I just told you, that cops were called pigs because they used to collect garbage on the side of the road, it's probably not going to make a whole lot of sense to you. And so I got to unpack some things first. I wrote some notes to kind of organize my thoughts because I don't want this to be a long video. So stick with me. So policing and police are not the same thing, right? The function of policing has always been about protecting businesses and the wealthy, right? And social control, right? Control as much of people's lives on a daily basis as you can to keep order according to what the wealthy and the government say order is, right? To keep everything proper, you know what I mean? And so, and that's still true today, right? Policing used to be called Social Security. Now we think of it as checks that elderly folks get, but it was Social Security in the truest form, right? So the police is a job, right? It's cops. Cops are police. Comes from the old English word cop. Like think of a cop and dope or cop in a pair of shoes, right? To take hold of something or possess something. That's what cops. That's how they got the word cop. That's how they were called cops, right? So, but policing is a bigger picture, right? The military does policing outside of our borders. Border Patrol polices who, why, and how people can come to this country and for what reasons, right? Or leave the country. We have national police that work across state lines. We have local police. I mean, there's tons of police, right? And we as a people are policed in tons of ways, right? Think about it. From where you can cross the street, right? Who can build schools? Who can go to those schools? Who has to go to those schools? What those schools can teach, right? Who pays taxes? How much and when? Who can practice medicine? Who can sell something and call it medicine, right? Who has to wear a mask? Who has to get a vaccine? How you're able to treat your kids? When and how you can get reimbursed for somebody doing you wrong, right? What is public property? What is private property? I mean, on so many levels, right? Businesses that sell food and you have to have licenses and you can't sell alcohol unless you have a license. And that is all policing, right? It is all ways to maintain control and order, right? Even the word property comes from the word proper, which means both something that you own, something that's yours, and also conforming to polite society, right? Ownership of property shows that you're a proper person. So anyways, in this country, a lot of the conversation about policing or police centers around race and racism, which is a thing, obviously, but it's never been just about race. It's about money, right? Who makes it, what they do with it, and just money, right? How do people secure money? And so, and that idea of policing actually started in Europe, you know what I mean? And big cities developed capitalism, right? The economic system that we know developed. Those two things got together, got busy, and created this thing called policing, right? Which is a new world order of sorts. Back then it was, you're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But so, yeah, in the US, slave patrols was a form of policing and a very brutal one. But it wasn't because slaves were black, right? It's because slaves were property who could make a profit for plantation owners, right? But plantation owners can't control a large number of slaves. They can't keep an eye on what everybody is doing. So they got people to patrol outside their plantation to make sure that they didn't lose their property, right? And if you want to think about it in a modern sense, that's one of the first examples in the United States of people having to have papers in order to be legal, right? Because if a slave was going to leave the plantation and go somewhere else, he had to have a note from the plantation owner that said he's going from here to there for this reason and it's okay, right? And slave patrols would still sometimes rough them up, but they couldn't rough them up too much because they're on plantation business, right? But without that paper, you could end up dead. So anyways, how do cops come to be called pigs? Well, they actually embraced the term at the beginning, right? So let's rewind to here. Having property is a reflection of how proper you are, right? And that's why having property in this country was a requirement to vote, right, in the early days. And that left out many of people who would now be considered white in the process. And with housing, fast forward, and one of the reasons that a lot of minority owned businesses were destroyed during Reconstruction, right after the Civil War, was because how can these people have property? How can they have ownership? They're not proper. Burn it down. And to this day, a lot of places make it very difficult for brown folks and black folks and Asian folks to get property, to buy property. And even when they do, to buy property in specific neighborhoods, right? Because they're not proper. They're not orderly, and they do not belong in a proper neighborhood, or they will contaminate it, right? And that whole contaminating thing comes up again in a second. So Europe pretty much invented the idea of public property, right? And hundreds and hundreds of years ago, right? And so policing, like I said, kind of came with that. Property equals clean. Not having property or being poor is dirt and filth, right? It's the flip side of the coin, right? And so you get trash and waste and sewage in these cities, in these growing big cities, which is a health problem for everybody. And in particular, because in these cities, you had people of different economic classes, right? So you had poor people, you had vagabonds, homeless, people, that drunkards and all that other stuff. And you had working people who also didn't have property. And then you had wealthy folks, right? And they all kind of lived together, right? In a rural area, you can deal with your sewage and trash and everything on your property. In an urban area, even if you have property, it's harder because everybody's more compact. But if you have money, what I'm saying, you can get somebody to kind of handle it for you. But what about poor people? What about, like I said, working people with no poverty, or living in a hotel with hella people, and the trash from buying things and consuming things, right? And so 1820s, 1830s, there was a big cholera outbreak in England. So a bunch of people died, a bunch of people got sick. People got together and tried to think, well, how did this happen, right? And so they make a connection between the social filth of dirty people and then an actual physical filth like this outbreak. And a lot of it's centered around smell, right? Bad smells reflect disorder, right? And there's lots of bad smelling people. And so those people are disorderly, and they're a threat to our health. They're a threat to our proper standing, right? So like having a napkin became a real social status symbol. You know what I mean? The dirty don't have napkins because they're poor. But they also don't need napkins because they can never really be clean because they're poor, right? So cleaning filth from the urban streets was the job of the police, because physical filth and moral filth is kind of hand in hand, right? And so to kind of break down this dirty is disorder thing, right? It means something's out of place. So picture a sink, right? And normally, quote unquote, in your sink goes dirty dishes and clean dishes go in the cupboard, let's say, right? And so a dirty sink means dishes are in it, and that's not where, those dishes can't be used, because that's not the place where you get dishes. But think about why can't they go there, right? Why can't you leave your dirty dishes in a sink, or in a cabinet, and your clean dishes in a sink, right? Because it's not normal, right? It's that's a normal way of doing things. But who defines normal, right? If you did have clean dishes in a cabinet and dirty dishes in a sink, well, you still have some order, right? You're keeping those things separate, but you're going to wind up getting policed by so-called normal people who come over and see your place and how you're doing it, right? What does that look like? They're going to make fun of you. They're going to gossip about you. They're probably not going to come over anymore. You're going to be a social outcast, right? Because you're dirty, even though you have clean dishes. You're disorderly, even though you do have some order, because that's not in line with the social norms of society. So we as people have been trained to be part of policing people around us to make sure that they line up with what's normal. And you see that with all races, all classes, all environments, right? Think of all the Karens and Beckys and whatever they call them going around filming people and this and that. They're trying to police their community. You know, the people that, you know, hey, what are you doing? Ask you extra questions, try to get in your business, right? It's because they're trained to police, you know, the community, right? And all of us are like that, you know. Hey, you can't do this. Hey, you can't do that. Hey, there's the right way to do this. Hey, this. Hey, that. So, and that's not to go off topic, but that's a big factor in discrimination and racism, right? We see or hear some people that do things different, and then we judge them as not socially acceptable, right? People that got roots in Africa have different texture to their hair, right? And you can't do that. That's not normal, right? Mexicans and other people in the West that people were conquered by Spain at some point can oftentimes speak another language, right? But that's not proper in public. You can't do that. People from India cook with foods. They have a distinct odor, right? And so non-Western Europeans smell that, and that's dirty, right? And Arabs and Muslims and their women dress different, and that's socially unacceptable, right? It violates our customs, you know. Asians and their writing, and it's not even letters, and you know, it's the list goes on and on and on, right? Light-skinned people can't be raso or Chicanos, right? And that's not how it works. And if you don't speak Spanish, you're not really Mexican, and all kinds of shit. So everybody has them, and that is where white privilege comes from. White privilege doesn't mean you're rich. White privilege doesn't mean any of that. It means that the norms of white society are equal to the norms of our national identity, right? So most of the time, white people can go through their daily lives doing their quote unquote normal stuff, and they're not going to be outcasted just doing normal shit. Getting dressed in the morning and going outside, they're not going to become social piranhas, right? They're not going to be harassed by police unless they dress like a different group. If they dress non-white, right, then maybe. But so that's the privilege, right? And white people that identify with customs that aren't associated with being white are then unusual or abnormal or whatever, right? So a big factor in curing that is real life exposure. You know what I mean? Getting to know people that have different customs and from different groups. And then you learn while they are different, they're not necessarily abnormal in terms of their values. We all want our kids to do better than us. We all have a fucking problem with our government in one way or another. We all want to be able to be free and kind of do our thing as long as it's not hurting other people. Those are normal values. They're not white values, black values, brown values, Asian values. It's just human values. And so anyway, back to this. So crime is disorder, right? It's things that are different from normal and orderly people. Proper people, you know, the people with money, they don't commit crimes, right? Supposedly. And so if you remove the physical waste and you remove the social waste, which often go hand in hand in people's minds, that would bring order, right? And now those workers are healthier, which is necessary, right? A disciplined working class doesn't participate in strikes or union organize, right? They follow orders. Learning cleanliness, not being lazy, following orders, that kind of stuff, that makes a good worker. And the US loves nothing more than a good worker, right? In the US at one time, it was illegal to not have a job, right? If you were a vagabond or a drunkard or whatever, the cops will snatch you up, maybe put you in jail for a couple of days, and then put you somewhere where you would go to work, right? And because you're not contributing to society if you're not working. You're not helping moneymakers make money if you're not working. Over time, that changed. You would stay in jail longer and you would do hard labor at jail. Because if you're not going to willingly work, we're going to force you to work. And that work still creates income and value for normal, orderly people, right? And there is the roots of the prison system as we know it. For those that have been in prison more recently, if you don't have a job, you're not entitled to the privileges of everybody else in the population, right? And if you're thought to be a threat to the safety and security, oftentimes because they feel like you have some power and authority over some of the folks incarcerated, and you're not using that power to keep order the way that they want, then you're a threat, and they go lock you up in the SHU program, which are the most expensive prisons to run in the state of California. They're making money right now. The guards are making money, right? Even if you're making money for the police, that's fine, because the police are upstanding people in their mind, right? Guards are upstanding people in their mind. Plus, the more budget corrections and police departments have, the more that they're able to do to keep order amongst everybody else, right? And a police department makes enough money to buy a helicopter. Well, now they can do some shit that they couldn't do before they had a helicopter, and those that money might come from writing tickets or whatever, right? So that, it all kind of ties together, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, there's that part. Reconstruction in the US after the Civil War was all about keeping Blacks in order, not because they were Black, but because in the minds of Americans leading up to that point, they were unclean, disorderly, and were only valued as property or making value for somebody else, right? And those Jim Crow laws, as much as it's talked about oppressing Black folks, which it did, it also helped create what this idea of whiteness in the US is. But that's a whole nother story. Back to the trash. So in the 1800s, cops in England, they always wash their hands after touching a suspect or their property, right? Now, modern days, they just wear gloves. Body piercings, tattoos, long hair, unshaven faces, all that stuff was dirty and impure. And then look at how people are profiled now, right? My dad once walked inside a bank where he'd been banking for years, and he wanted to deposit a check and get cash out right away. He's a contractor. He was in his work clothes, and he saw a sign for a credit card, and he asked him for an application. They told him, we don't have any. Like a month later, he was dressed to go to a funeral, and again stopped by the bank and went inside to cash a check. And they said, oh, sir, have you applied for this? And he's like, nah, man, but I don't really have time. They said, no, it only takes a couple minutes. And he was approved for the credit card. You know what I mean? So we still judge and look at people and try to put them in a category of clean or not clean. So house pigs, house Negroes, field pigs, field Negroes, all this stuff ties together. Just work with me. People in Europe used to keep house pigs to clean their property, right? And they treated them like pets until they got killed for a meal. Then there was those wild field pigs, which were disorderly, and they were killed on site, whether for fun or for food. Cops embraced that idea of being called a pig back then, because it was a balance between ordered society and wild society, right? They cleaned up the trash to benefit the family. The family was ordered society. So fast forward to, the 70s, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was a highly educated group of people, right? They recruited from college campuses, they sent people to college, and their self-defense was in the face of policing, not just police officers, right? And at its core, it was not racial. You had members of all kinds of groups, but as well-educated people, they studied the same old writings of sociologists, we call it the Dead White Guy Club, that I did, right? When I was at Berkeley, right? And some of them were at Berkeley, years before me. And other universities, they studied the same shit. The same writings I learned this stuff from, they were learning this stuff from before I was even born. And so they learned all this stuff that you guys are learning if you stuck around this long. And this is why they came up with the term house Negro and field Negro. That's their words, not mine. I'm not trying to be disrespectful or derogatory. But those were your words that they used to differentiate between those beholden to their master and those that were more rebellious and resistant, right? And that whole idea of social policing, where they convince you to police your own people for their benefit. It's not for your benefit, right? And they returned to calling cops pigs. They didn't pull that shit out of thin air. They returned to calling them pigs, right? And it was a critique on the system of policing directed at the police officers, which is the agent of policing, the arm of policing that most of us come in contact with the most, right? And it was funny right? I've had the privilege of doing time with Black Panthers and spending time with them, of sitting down with Angela Davis on multiple occasions and having conversations with her. I've read the vast majority of Panther literature, a lot of it when I was in prison. And so yes, it was funny. Yes, it was comical, but it wasn't pulled out of thin air. But cops then, just like cops now, are pretty much uneducated. And the American public at large is generally pretty uneducated too. So they all just took it as an insult. But those who really knew about police and policing did not. So I found a quote in a 1970 underground magazine out of the UK called Friends. They had a pig of the month column, right? Talking about cops. Police magazine, which at the time was like the leading publication of the police view. Like think of Blue Lives Matter. That was like Blue Lives Matter to the extreme. They replied, should we be upset? Not at all. The pig has made a notable contribution to our national well-being for centuries. As such, it has a great advantage over hippie squatters whose concept of sanitation is far more primitive than its own. And so, obviously in time, the job of policing became way too much for just police. So the government stepped in and created different branches of government: the health department, the sanitation department, the Food and Drug Administration. They created all these different wings to take those responsibility off the shoulders of walking the beat cops, because it was just fucking too much, right? And cops were complaining, like, we gotta do everything. But policing is still central to this country and to our national identity, man, just as it was in Europe hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So there you have it. Cops are pigs. That's the story. Hopefully you learned something. There's a lot more to this that I could have unpacked, but you basically got a half a semester at least of some of the leading academic teachings that you will find at the most prestigious colleges in this country in less than 25 minutes. Help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Please check out the other content. I'm gonna find some of these academic writings and post them on my Patreon. The link will be in the bio. And yeah, let's move forward, man. You guys have a good one.